Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I will say welcome. My name is Emily Churkin. I'm known as the Screen Time Consultant or the author behind First Fish Chronicles. I am also an author. I wrote a book called The Screen Time Solution, which came out 2 years ago, and I'm actually working on book two, which is about EdTech. So this experience today is a culmination of a lot of my work, the things that I've been finding about education as I go through this, what I want to share with you, but I also really do appreciate hearing from you if there are things that come up or other questions that you have. Please reach out. So I will share lots of different ways that you can do that with me, share information with me later. I am going to go ahead and dive in. Okay, like I said, I'm an author. I'm a former middle school teacher, so I spent 12 years teaching middle school, primarily seventh grade English, but I worked in a lot of different capacities. And I entered the classroom in 2003 and I left in 2015. And so I always say that my experience in the classroom really spanned kind of the no tech to the beginning of all in on tech. And I don't mean just ed tech, I mean also smartphones that my students had or didn't have when I first started teaching, because no one had one. No one had even a flip phone. And if they did, they were totally embarrassed, like their parent was sending them with a flip phone to school. Obviously, things have changed a little bit since then. So I do a lot of public speaking. I consider myself an advocate for children, for tech intentional practices, for protecting the institution of educators and teachers. I do consult. I will share more about that later. I'm also a parent. I have two teenagers, 14 and almost 18, and it is a bittersweet process to raise children. It's also the most rewarding job I've ever had. So I come at this professionally also as a parent in this mire with you. And yeah, and actually, I guess most recently I've been teaching at the University of Washington in the Evans School of Public Policy, and I love teaching. So I'm actually really happy to be back in the classroom with that. So I want to start with something hard hitting, which you may have seen come across your feeds lately, which is this fact that children today are less cognitively capable than we were at their age. I'm sure you've heard about or will be hearing about Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath and his book, The Digital Delusion. Fun side fact, I wrote about Jared in my epilogue a few years ago. I actually heard him on a webinar, reached out to him. I was so relieved to find someone else saying what I wanted to be said and having the research to back it up. So I want to start with this because I also think it's really important that we acknowledge that something is not right in the room when it comes to digital tech and in the classroom in particular, and that we have to do better. And so I think this is a opening salvo for conversation about needing to reevaluate what we're doing. Um, as we do this, of course, I want to talk about the fact, too, that there are actually sort of two digital elephants in the room. One is the smartphones, smartwatches, social media that are parent issued, right? Like, again, you know what that looks like, you know what that is. Historically, that didn't really happen until kids were 10, 11, 12. We see this happening younger and younger, very, very young children with smartphones, with smartwatches, with access to iPads at home given to them by parents. But we have a second elephant in the room, which is this tech that is assigned by school or school issued tech. So this could be Chromebooks, iPads, a digital curriculum, learning management system. We'll talk a little bit more about what ed tech is. But I always feel like when we talk about one of these, we can't ignore the other one. So it is great that there are movements happening around removing removing phones from the school day or, asking children not to be able to access them. Sometimes they're called school bans or phone bans. I prefer to think of it as we're not banning children from the tech, we're banning technology companies from the children during the school day, at least. But if we're going to do that, the same thing has to be true for what we're talking about when it comes to ed tech, because as you'll see, they are pretty much the same thing. I want to start with this photo. This is a friend of mine took this. This is a picture of kindergarten students on the playground before school. They have opportunities to run around, play on the playground, play with their friends, but instead they are sitting on the pavement looking at their school issued iPads. And I think we're at a point, I hope we're at a point where most of us, if not all of us, can agree that if children have a playground to play on, they should play on it. They should not sit on their iPad instead of playing on it. And so I think this is one example. This is not all kindergarten students, of course, but this is a typical scene in an American school today. So let's talk a little bit about what ed tech is. And I have a slightly different definition than Jared, but I'll explain what I mean. And so to me, the way I define ed tech is any digital tool or product used in or for education. So this could be anything from learning management systems, student information systems, grading portals, homework platforms, digital curriculum on educational apps, any sort of digitized student records, behavior, attendance, health, the one-to-one devices themselves, the hardware, any sort of AI tutors, AI tools, and then also something called surveillance technology, which would be things like monitoring software and apps. Are there more things that we could add? Absolutely. This is very broad. And the one area where I would say I differ a little bit from some of my colleagues is actually I consider ed tech any process that is either student or teacher facing. Teacher has a side of that, and there's an impact on teaching as well for teachers who have that. And so I include that. Yeah, it's a broad definition, and it is easy to say, well, you're painting this with a very wide brush, and that is absolutely true. But part of the problem is that it has become very enmeshed in our school system. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about what I mean by that. So I call it sort of the ed tech ecosystem. All of these different things are working together. And that is one of the hardest things about addressing the challenges that come with them, because even if there are some good components, they are so enmeshed and so entangled in all of these other things that it's very hard to extricate. Another thing I just want to point out is like if you don't know all of these logos, I mean, I'm probably guessing most of us know the ones on the left in terms of the devices themselves. But if you've never heard of Schoology or IXL or Amplifier, iReady or Instructure, PowerSchool, those are names you should know because I would say that these are some of the most powerful companies you've never heard of, and they are behind the scenes of the EdTech ecosystem. Since I made this slide a year ago and I've updated it as I do these presentations, I actually need to add a second layer to this. So this is what I call secondary ed tech. And this includes surveillance tools that are tech-based that include things like GoGuardian, Securely, Bark, Life 360. Different schools often contract with different surveillance companies or technology companies that do surveillance. And what I mean by that, and I am intentionally using the word surveillance, is that it is allows teachers, sometimes parents, but it depends on the service and the product, to monitor what their children are doing, which in theory sounds like a really good idea. But I have a lot of safety concerns around that as well. And so, when it comes to these products, these are the ones that exist. They have presented a lot of problems. As a result of that, we've layered in security or filtering or surveillance tools to quote unquote keep kids safe. But I would argue that we shouldn't even need these because if the primary products themselves were safe or effective or used very intentionally, we wouldn't need this secondary tech. And so I see this as like, we have to stop trying to give kids safer cigarettes. We need to stop giving them cigarettes in the first place. And then, of course, on top of all of this is the fact that ed tech has been infused with generative AI in particular. And I think this is something you've experienced probably in your own inbox or in your own work life or on your own phone, that even if you didn't ask for it or want it or download it, AI is appearing everywhere. A Google search is no longer just a Google search. It is you get the AI summary first. And so again, it isn't an opt-in. It is it is put on you. And if you want to opt out, it's actually really, really quite difficult. So I want us, as we go into this, to think about the enmeshment of this, that ed tech and AI are an ecosystem. I really believe, and there's a wonderful report out of the NEPC about this, that AI, in being introducing AI into ed tech, has actually made all of the problems with ed tech far worse, far more dangerous, far more risky. And really what this is building to is the only thing that I really want you to take home tonight, which is that the business models are the same, that ed tech is just big tech in a sweater vest. Or for my friends abroad, ed tech is just big tech in a school uniform. And I say this because at the end of the day, the business models are the same. They rely on user data to put ads up that we see. Ads drive revenue, companies make money. Obviously, that's a simplified version, but ed tech companies operate in almost the same way or the same way as big tech companies for the most part. So there are also other issues with this. One is that it just doesn't work. And we have been hearing this from numerous different places, not just Jared's work, but even as early as 2023, the UNESCO report on the Global Education Monitoring Report found that there was little robust evidence on digital technology's added value in education, and the evidence that does exist comes from those trying to sell it. This is something that I do a lot in my activism, is to try to pull back the curtain a little bit on where the funding source is for a lot of the products that are being deployed in schools. And I write about that at my Substack in a series called The Reckoning. And we have spent some time, my colleague and I, looking at those funding trails. So it's really important that we need to ask these questions. Just like if this would be like Coca-Cola sponsoring a vending machine in the schools back in the 90s, right? This was, they had a vested interest in getting their products in the school because it put it in front of children. The same is true for ed tech. So I want to talk first about some of the mistakes we've made around ed tech and some of the myths and truths that you might be hearing about ed tech, so that you go into this conversation with your schools or your teachers with information to push back or even just ask questions. So first, I want to talk about three mistakes we've made briefly. First mistake we've made is that there has been an over-reliance on one-to-one devices and internet-connected tools in the name of learning or efficacy. That's mistake number one. Mistake number two is that we have undervalued the hands-on, relationship-based role of teachers in the learning experience. And mistake number three is that we have failed to protect children, and I would add teachers, from data and privacy breaches that are embedded within the business model of EdTech. Because that's what's happening, is that when this data gets in the wrong hands, when programs are hacked or, data is mined by third parties and that's leaked, those breaches will actually sweep teacher data into that as well. So this isn't just about children. And this is, something that people don't even know about. So just like we have been fighting for play-based childhoods and phone-free schools and social media regulation, we now have to take this fight to ed tech too. And I want to talk about what I see as sort of the 6 myths and truths of ed tech. This is them listed out. I'm going to walk through them one at a time. So let's start with this one. And you probably have heard this, that ed tech improves learning. And again, remember that I'm putting ed tech in quotes somewhat. This is a broad sweeping thing. But what we might hear variations of this as like, well, we can personalize learning to every child, or this product allows us to make learning frictionless, or we can accelerate learning, or we can provide support for children using these tools. I want to say something as a teacher. 20 years ago, we were doing professional developments about differentiated instruction and personalized learning. 20 years ago. And what it meant at the time that I was teaching was you learn about your students. You learn to meet them where they are. And that is what it means to differentiate and personalize learning. You know what their ability is, you know what they're capable of, and then you know where to push them, just what that level is, the zone of proximal development, if you will. That's what it meant to personalize learning. Personalized learning has been co-opted by the tech industry to mean we can use technology to assess students and meet them where they are. Now, is it possible to do that in a way that provides some useful information? Sure. We have gone way, way past useful and beneficial and into areas where it is negatively impacting children, teacher and student relationships, and learning itself. So let's look at some of these stats. So at the core of this is this fundamental misunderstanding about how children learn. And of course, Jared's research goes well into about what it is, the science of learning and what that is. We only need to look at some of the test scores starting around the year 2012. And this is, what is this? These are OECD scores from countries across the 38 OECD countries. Test scores starting around 2012, roughly, is where, of course, scores started to drop. And one thing that these numbers show, I mean, first of all, testing isn't by any stretch the only way to assess learning or not. In fact, I would argue it's got its own limitations. But one thing we hear a lot is that COVID or the pandemic or lockdown or remote learning is what caused all this. That's not true. This was a decline that was happening beforehand. And in fact, my colleagues and I have been fighting this since 2018, at least the advocacy groups I've been in. And so we were concerned back in 2018. The other thing I want to just say too is what we know about learning is that it happens in moments of friction and struggle and difficulty. And when we try to make learning easier or frictionless, we by definition stop the learning process. Additionally, learning takes time. We don't go to the gym and lift the heaviest weight our first day of, weight training. We work our way up to it. We practice it. We do a little bit incrementally each day. That's how we embed that learning and knowledge into our brains. And so the same is true, especially true for children, right? Think back to how you learned something in your early childhood or elementary or middle or high school days. So, again, there is a misguided assumption that learning is measurable, certainly only by test scores, which again, I recognize the limitations of that. But we are cognitively worse off. Children today, cognitively worse off than they were a generation ago. Let's look at another. I actually just put these in the slideshow today. Again, this is from Jared's work. What's really interesting about this is he actually looked at different states and the years at which they imposed any sort of computer and tech requirement, like at a tipping point, as where it was the majority of students in the state would be using it. So what's really interesting is it actually doesn't give us the year, it gives us the blue line, which is the year by which he sort of estimated that tipping point occurred or the rollout occurred. And again, these are math scores for fourth grade and eighth grade, reading scores for fourth grade and eighth grade. What you see is that the years that we started implementing these digital products is the years that test scores again started falling. So this is actually true internationally across other forms of testing and data that Dr. Horvath has looked at. So I just pulled this one out because it's a pretty arresting visual to just see it quite starkly. And again, I'm going to add another slide in here. I just added this the other day because this is also new research from Dr. Jean Twenge, who Jared and Jean and I were two of the three of the four people who testified before the U.S. Senate in January, and I followed their work for years. And so Jean's research, she looks at research over generations. And one of the most recent things she found, and I think this is really compelling because what it does is it combines the personal tech with the ed tech. And so again, we're talking like students have phones and that's a problem, but students also have Chromebooks or whatever, and that's a problem. And what this finding shows is that the scores on tests do get impacted by the presence of screen use for entertainment. And so to break this down, in countries where kids spend less time on their devices, and she said it just doesn't differentiate between which device, so whether it's the school computer or their phone, both experiences have a negative impact on their test scores when students use those screens for entertainment. Now, people might say, oh, well, kids aren't in schools using them for entertainment, they're using them for learning. To which I say, that's absolutely not true. You can walk into any school and see all kinds of ways that students are using their school-issued devices for entertainment purposes, whether that's watching YouTube because it's available or somehow looking through the internet, playing games. And even the games themselves are tricky because sometimes the curriculum itself looks like a game. And so the question is this for entertainment? Is this for learning? I have my opinions, as does Jared, and as this research shows. So again, not surprisingly, when kids spend more time on their devices, whether it is their phone or their laptop for entertainment, test scores drop. And you can see the higher device use has a much bigger impact. Again, I think having numbers and data is helpful and important, but that doesn't need it. It makes me very frustrated when we have to prove why things are bad when it hasn't been proven that these things are good. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. So Okay, again, and from the OECD report I just mentioned, students who use computers frequently at school do a lot worse in most learning outcomes. And of course, perhaps most disappointing is that technology is of little help in bridging the skills divide between advantaged and disadvantaged students. And actually, this slide could also appear in another of our myths, which is about improving equity in advantaged and disadvantaged student bodies. And so, one of the findings here is that it actually does not close the skills divide. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. There are numerous other examples of how EdTech has failed students and learning. This is what one of my favorites is that investing in air conditioning yielded a 30% improvement in learning outcomes over giving kids laptops. This is one of Jared's studies that he cites. Or that 38 minutes of every 60 minutes on a laptop in class is spent off task. And if you're a teacher and you're listening and, I imagine you have seen this and that. Again, we shouldn't be surprised. Children do not have fully formed brains. Impulse control is still being built and developed. Of course, they're going to be distracted. This makes complete sense from a developmental standpoint. Another myth that I hear Tech Helps will claim that they have this technology based solution to the problem of overworked teachers who are overwhelmed by large classes. So I fully agree that we need to support teachers and help those who feel overwhelmed and overworked and reduce class sizes. And there's ample research that shows that reducing class size has a net benefit on students. But the problem with this narrative is that technology is not the solution to fixing that problem. And in fact, technology companies, ed tech companies specifically, make no secret of their goal to scale technology within school. Well, to scale something means to do more with less. And so that means more students in a classroom and asking a teacher, of course, to get tech support to scale that. And so again, we hear that old model of education of a sage on the stage being moved to an evolve as a guide on the side. Look, again, I'll say this. I said this before and I will say it again. I'm not anti-technology, despite what I'm saying. I am here for really honestly common sense reasons. We should help teachers. We should reduce class sizes. The answer to that is not giving children or teachers more tech. And here's what I mean by that. Here is a solution. This is a GoGuardian. Again, this is one of those surveillance tech platforms I mentioned earlier that this is the solution. So you have a class, this is a sample screen. This is what a teacher can look at. It is a screen of her students' screens. So she can see each student, what they are looking at in which program on their own device. I will tell you that the thing I liked least about classroom teaching was sitting at my computer. Especially if I only had my students for 45 minutes a day. If I had to spend time sitting at my computer watching their screens of screens, I was not teaching. I was not engaging with my students. And so again, the solution here in my mind is don't have second graders on screens in the first place. And then you solve this problem. The other thing is like I said, we've literally put a distraction device on every student's desk. This is going to make it a lot harder to get kids to pay attention. So again, the solution isn't to give a teacher a monitoring tool, it's to take away the device that's causing the distraction. Teachers have become IT administrators or administrators or attention police, where, not only do they have to police personal devices, but now they have to police student use of Chromebooks. And so we're removing from things from teaching that made it the people join the profession in the first place, which is to work directly with children and help them learn. And so, again, unfortunately, I think this has been part of the strategy, which is to drive teachers away, wear them down, drive them out, and then offer this tech-based solution like AI tutors, for example, which are much cheaper. I mean, they are and they aren't. And that's what's happening. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing reading tutors given in, agentic AI tutors given to children as young as kindergarten for reading support. And so again, scaling teaching or scaling education is not going to help children. And so again, children are not widgets, teachers are not automatons. And so again, this does not work and we need to do something about it. Vauhini Vara wrote in Bloomberg last year, the outreach from Silicon Valley to schools seems to follow a playbook developed during a decades-long attempt to turn public education into a market for private products. Again, the business model of EdTech is the business model of big tech, and they are seeking to make a profit. Okay, back to the one I was just mentioning a minute ago about equity. So I hear this a lot that EdTech will close the achievement gap, the digital divide, it will decrease inequities, democratize education. Look, this is problematic because the argument goes that we can use EdTech tools to support teachers in underserved schools. We can get AI buddies or mental health chatbots to improve, those services in areas where it's hard to recruit teachers. But the problem is that this is actually disproportionately harmful. And so, actually, in reality, what we are seeing are three new digital divides. EdTech is worsening inequities, and the use of generative AI is exacerbating all of these problems. So, first, we have a digital safety divide, which is that safer versions of EdTech cost more. And so, to have even the option, if you were going to use an EdTech platform to provide the safest version of it possible, you have to pay more. And so, schools with fewer resources are not going to be able to do that. And I will give you an example later of this, actually. I'm not going to say it now. Additionally, we know there is going to be a digital learning divide. Historically, poor children get worse quality education. Today, EdTech products embedded with generative AI are being pitched to schools as opportunities to increase equity. Unfortunately, chronically underfunded schools don't need more tech. They need more teachers. They need more counselors. They need more learning specialists. They need more books. They do not need robots. Internet Safety Labs, who I highly recommend as an independent organization, found that the lowest income students receive the lowest amount of vetting of EdTech products for safety, and they receive the highest percentage of educational apps with ads. And I'll show you an example of that later. But that's a problem. Children should not be seeing advertisements on school issued devices at all at school for any reason. So EdTech tools don't close the achievement gap. One study found that children would have to spend hours on one math app over a year to achieve the equivalent of a single grade increase, with no evidence that this closed the attainment gaps for the least advantaged. And of course, we only have to look where tech executives themselves send their own children to be educated. It is nature-based, low-tech schools. And then finally, there's a digital advocacy divide. It's not free or easy to advocate. Working parents can't leave their jobs to testify before the school board during daytime meetings or meet with a principal or to support their teachers. So EdTech is used rationally or to assess if it's being used rationally. And, I recognize my own privilege in being able to do this depends heavily on having personal time and resources and expertise to do this work. And there's no way I could do this if I had a second full-time job. So unfortunately, those with means will be able to access personalized bespoke services while the rest of us get crappy technology and robots for teachers. And so we have to advocate for this for all children because it is worse for all children if we don't. Again, oh, I think I said this one already. Duplicate. Oh, well, skipping on. This one. So my colleague, Dr. Hillman in the UK, wrote an excellent op-ed last year in The Guardian. And she said that as these EdTech systems scale and cheapen, however, a troubling divide is emerging. Mass app-based instruction for the many and human tutoring and intellectual exchange reserved for the elite. What is sold as the democratization of education may be entrenching further inequality. Okay, when it comes to safety, we are told that EdTech is safe for children. Just like years ago, the tobacco industry told us cigarettes smoking was not bad for your health. Unfortunately, you can go to any website for any EdTech company and read about their comprehensive security strategy or their privacy promises or their compliance with FERPA and other regulations and the importance of maintaining confidentiality. Unfortunately, all of these things are a hope and a dream. And, maybe the intent is good, but in reality, that's not what's happening. And so there are at least three ways that EdTech harms children. And, there are many more, but I'm going to give you some high level ones here. Is exposure to harmful content, data privacy harms, and the mental health and suicide risks that come with having internet access devices. So let's start with this one. I mentioned a minute ago about the ads. So on the left here, this is a parent recently sent me screenshots. Many of you may have your children using Typing Club as a way of learning how to type, which I would say is a bare minimum skill before we hand out devices, but many kids never even learn how to type. But in Typing Club, which is a relatively innocuous EdTech product, her son encountered numerous ads in I think it was 15-minute span. And so he was in third grade. And she realized that he's being advertised to in the sidebar of Typing Club at a rate of 1 to 2 ads per minute. She said there were ads for Coca-Cola, cat food, Robux, which is the currency within Roblox, which is a deeply unsafe gaming platform for children, home improvement websites that had a woman in a shower, supplements, sports cars, and the most alarming, which are the screenshots here, were 3 different video ads for gambling websites, which looked very alluring. And her son reported seeing these during the school day when he used it at school as well. Fortunately, this had a positive outcome. The teacher, she reported it to the principal, who thought that it had been an ad-free program, and was surprised to learn that there were ads. But again, if we go back to the high cost of free, right? You are the product if it is free. And so not that I want schools to be paying more money for ed tech, but if you are getting a free version, you are probably getting ad content. And I would argue that no child should be seeing ads for Roblox or gambling websites in third grade at school. The other example in this picture is a screenshot of my own child's YouTube access from her account on Schoology. And so this is the one I felt most comfortable sharing in a public webinar. There are far worse examples. But I don't know if you can read the small print here, but it says how to commit suicide. And this is within her school platform. She was able to search up these videos in YouTube. And so some schools, I think, are heading towards blocking YouTube, but that is a game of digital whack-a-mole because, again, you can block it in one place, but that doesn't mean it's going to be available, not available. It will still be accessible to children in other places as well. Okay. I see a question just popped up. Sorry, it was a few minutes ago about the shared screen whole group experience, teacher guided, Go Noodle. I think normalizing screen use in school is problematic. I think I just would argue that a product or, again, a company has a vested interest in you using that and showing it to your students. And if there is any reason you could do it yourself as a teacher, then you should. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I mentioned data and privacy risks, internet safety labs. Again, I mentioned them, highly recommend them as a resource, found that 96% of EdTech apps sell children's data to third parties. That's a problem. So that's nearly every single one of the apps our children are using. And I don't know if I have this slide later in here, but Internet Safety Labs also found that on average, schools use between 100 and 150 apps per school. And a report by Instructure, which is an ed tech company, parent company that owns Canvas, found it's actually in their marketing materials. They bragged that schools were averaging over 2,000 unique ed tech products. And that was something they were proud of. So I think even if you have the best IT person in the world working in your district, there's no way that they know every single data or privacy risk that comes with every single product that is sanctioned by the district, because that's also the ones that are known, right? There are teachers who are using products without going through the proper channels. And again, sometimes that's intentional and sometimes that's just because kids are saying, let's use this thing or let's look this up. So this is problematic because data is extremely valuable. One source said that on the black market, a child's educational record is worth $250 to $350. So if you multiply that by the nearly 50 million children enrolled in American public schools, that means our children's data is worth roughly $15 billion, which is a very large market, and you can understand why hackers might not want to ignore it. These are some of the privacy statements that I mentioned that, these companies put. And I'm not going to read all of them, but the white boxes next to them are lawsuits that have been filed against each of these companies for data breaches primarily. And so again, you need to know why there are problems, and just stopping at reading the, privacy statement or their claim on their website isn't enough. And so actually, I'm going to pop in the chat here. My colleagues at the EdTech Law Center are actively pursuing these cases. And if you look on their website at edtech.law under active cases, you can look at the details of more of these. And again, like I said, data breaches are common. In a year ago, there was a PowerSchool data breach records going back 40 years, which is crazy because that's way pre, learning management system. But they were housed in the systems. Plus another 10 million teacher records were hacked within the PowerSchool system. So, and then there's also physical, mental, cognitive, and emotional risks to using screens. I mean, we know that screen use before 2 is linked to accelerated anxiety by 13. We know that more time you spend on social media, the worse your mental health. We know that the rates for contemplating suicide for young girls is extremely high. New research shows that 1 in 3 boys is gambling online before age 18, which makes those ads for gambling websites on the 8-year-old's computer extremely problematic. And again, we know there's issues with focus and attention and sleep and social skills and learning, mental health. We know these things. These are proven harms associated with excessive screen use by children. The majority of them, well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say most of that is on internet connected devices, but there are still harms for using screens that aren't internet connected. Although for the most part, that is what children are accessing, whether it's a personal device or a school device. And I always say too, what is a Chromebook? It's an internet connection. That's it. A Chromebook doesn't function without the internet. So if you take away the internet, the Chromebook is a useless tool. And again, these are just some of the headlines about AI, data breaches, harms by chatbots. If we're not aware of these, we need to be. And if you are aware of these, then you should be absolutely horrified that schools would even entertain the idea of providing children with chatbots for or in the name of education and learning. Okay. And again, this is from Bauhini Vara. The outreach seems to follow a playbook. I think I might have just said this into a decades-long attempt to turn public education into a market for private products. And, again, like I said, these are some of the most powerful products you've never heard of. Again, many of these edtech companies are owned by private equity. PowerSchool itself is owned by Bain Capital, worth $6 billion with a B dollars. Okay, myth number 5, EdTech prepares kids for the future. I hear this all the time. This is the world we live in. In order to be successful, children must have technology now. This is repeated through all kinds of school literature, that this is our job, we need to roll this out. And here's a very important, nuanced part of this. I agree that children will be in a world where technology exists. And I agree that we need to prepare them for the future. But children need technology education, not educational technology. And I want to talk about this distinction because it is so important. EdTech displaces skills. Resisting and delaying it now is what is going to set our kids up for future success, not more tech in childhood, not more tech in education. And again, look at where tech executives send their kids themselves. When we talk about what kids need in today's 2026 landscape, it is technology education. What that means is equipping children with skills that they will need to thrive in the digital world. And that includes skills like word processing and typing, identifying mis and disinformation. How does a computer work? Many don't even know how to turn them on or off. They're just always on, right? What is an algorithm? Media literacy. What is persuasive design? Understanding the business model of the tech industry. That's an extremely important thing to know about because you are the product in any of these free products or apps. And also, what are the specific pedagogical uses of technology for teaching? And I'm going to say that this is the bare minimum of what technology education should be because there's a lot of other skills children need too. And I'll talk about those in a minute. But I want to note this. You can teach technology education without internet connected devices. So I want to encourage you, if you're being told, well, we're teaching these things to children on these devices. First of all, you don't need the devices to teach these skills. But second of all, those companies who make the programs, the media literacy curriculum or digital wellness curriculum, are often funded by tech companies themselves, again, who have a vested interest in your children being on that device. So again, I would love, and this is what I see as the ideal, is to return to a computer lab model where you have a trained educator, a trained teacher who can stand before a class and teach them these things. Maybe the teacher themselves has an example to show a student or a class of students. That makes sense. But just like we teach alcohol and drug use safety or sex ed, we do not hand teenagers alcohol and drugs to teach them about safe use. That is absolutely crazy to me. So the same thing has to apply when it comes to technology. We do not hand children the internet to teach them about being safe on the internet. In fact, I posted something about this the other day that the best preparation for a digital future is actually an analog childhood because there are other skills that children need, not just technological ones. In fact, I would argue all of the technological ones can come after they have had an analog childhood. And I mean primarily analog. Of course, there are going to be times we watch movies as a family. Of course, we're going to use technology to communicate or FaceTime with our family members. But for the most part, what childhood looks like today is very, very different than how we grew up. I'm going to close with the myths, and then I've got a few more things I want to say, and then I will open up for questions. But I hear this one all the time too. We can't fight ed tech. It's too late. The toothpaste is out of the tube. Technology's here to stay. The problem with statements like this is that they stem from highly persuasive marketing tactics that tap into our own fear of missing out or FOMO. If we don't use it now, it will be too late. But I am going to tell you right now that when I was 8 years old, I was learning the Oregon Trail on a non-internet connected green and white screened computer in a computer lab. And I loved playing that game, but it taught me zero technology skills and is completely irrelevant to my adult use of technology. Technology moves faster than ever. The things that our children might be learning in school today, technologically speaking, are going to be very different in 5, 10, 20 years. So that argument doesn't even hold water. And the reality too here is that ed tech is not a foregone conclusion. Any societal change that we have encountered in our life might start with something seemingly insurmountable, but it doesn't have to be our future. We are capable of changing this. We were told this that to change smoking was too hard, or gay marriage, or all kinds of other things that have now become just accepted or common rights or change that has happened. We are going to have technology in the future. I will not dispute that. But if we get this right now, children don't need to be harmed in their exposure to it before they're developmentally ready. It is possible to build a safer internet. It is possible to regulate tech companies. It is possible to protect children's data and privacy as the default. It does mean we have to force tech companies to align their business practices with the needs of children and teachers. And that might mean changing the way they operate. And frankly, I think that's okay. That's what happened with big tobacco. People can still buy cigarettes, but kids aren't smoking in third grade classrooms. We can't accept that just because a powerful industry with big marketing budgets have misled teachers, educators, school leaders, and politicians and parents for years, that we have to accept this as our fate. In truth, I think we're very right to be concerned. We are right to ask questions about the business model. We are right to ask questions about efficacy. And we are right to want to protect our children from commercialization and exploitation. This isn't the first time that the ed tech industry is going to make claims that their products are, sorry, it's not the first time that we will make claims that their products are faulty or harmful. And the children of the leaders of the ed tech industry and tech industry are sending their kids to the low tech schools. We've seen this before, and we can envision a different ending. So what do children need? Bare minimum, these are the skills that we should be prioritizing in childhood. Jared talks about this example of like, if I show you a picture of a sun, do you feel warmer? Well, yeah, probably, but are you tan? No. So AI in particular, but ed tech in general and learning on a screen can mimic these feelings. Like we might think we're learning because we've got more points in the math game, but they will never actually impart learning the way a human teacher will. And AI in particular is never going to be capable of showing empathy. And that is because it is not a biological human experience. And so what we need to prioritize are opportunities for executive function, which are the skills that children need to thrive as adults in the workplace: communication, collaboration, empathy, critical thinking, problem solving, time management, organization. Those are the skills that determine successful employees, not how well they navigate an app. Obviously, movement and play are just imperative in childhood. We know there are so many benefits to this. Children are not getting enough of it. they're averaging 7.5 hours of time on screens outside of school hours for 8 to 18-year-olds. Children need less of this overall. And again, empathy and compassion. So again, Dr. Hillman writes about this in her op-ed, and I really just appreciated her observation that the tactics here are used by big tobacco, were used by big tobacco, that if we can manufacture doubt to delay regulation or market uncertainty as progress, then, we worry that our kids might be left behind. And that's not an accident because it mirrors the marketing logic that kept people smoking for decades. And this is so exactly what we are seeing in the tech industry and in the ed tech industry today. The same playbook. Schools didn't hand out cigarettes in classrooms and tell parents, trust us, this is safe, and kids need to be prepared. That is the big difference here with big tobacco. Big tobacco, smoking was happening outside of classroom in terms of teachers weren't handing it out. But we need to recognize that we are handing the kids these products in the name of education and resist. Okay. I don't know if you noticed, but in the title of this webinar, I had written the dangers of ed tech. And I realized that it might be construed as an inflammatory thing to say. But here's why I said that. Because if you haven't gotten that from the examples so far, I believe at this point in 2026, it is increasingly clear that most tech-based products detract from learning, focus, attention, cognitive effort, relationship building, etc., while still exposing developing brains to content beyond their ability to understand or make sense of. But it's also dangerous for school leaders to hand these products to children and rely on the trust parents have historically had in schools. This is one of the trickiest parts of this to navigate, is that parents want to trust that what schools are giving their children are safe. And it is dangerous for schools to trust that tech companies have children's and educators' best interests at heart. They don't. And in fact, they make no secret of their goal to move teachers to the sidelines. It is dangerous that pediatricians and psychologists and some superintendents are partnering with tech companies to take money from them to promote their products or be influencers, because this puts profits before people. And my goodness, what is education if not people, right? The basis of learning is in the context of human relationships. It's also dangerous to blame parents for asking very important questions. Yes, we have work to do as adults, as parents. Absolutely, we'll be the first to say that. But to be told you can't opt your child out of YouTube because it's the curriculum, or that this is the curriculum and you can't opt out, too bad. Or, as one parent told me, her principal said she had to file a public records request to find a list of all the apps her child was using. We are eroding the trust that parents have in public schools that leads to parents pulling their kids out, and that is what is happening. And it is dangerous to displace friction and effort and struggle that is in the embodiment of learning, because that means we are raising a future citizenry who cannot think critically, who cannot make sense of complex ideas, who cannot separate fact from fraud. And that is a deeply grave threat to democracy itself. So I say the word dangerous because we're at an inflection point. This is the time to act. And the good news is almost 300 people registered for this webinar, which tells me that there are people ready and wanting to act. So what can you do? Because I wouldn't just tell you all of this and not actually tell you what you can do about it. Here are 3 things. These are the starting points. We have to admit we've made a big mistake. This is not about blaming teachers. It's not even about blaming administrators if they're willing to say, well, we went too far on this and we need to fix it. Number 2 is we need to refuse to accept that ed tech is a foregone conclusion. It is not. It does not have to be our future or even our present. And number 3, we have to advocate for new norms around technology use in education. And then we get down to fighting. And what that looks like is coalition building and collective action, right? We are all swimming in the ocean together, and you are not alone, but someone has to go first. And this is why I write at my Substack called First Fish Chronicles, because somebody has to be willing to ask these questions. Somebody has to be willing to write the emails or ask the superintendent or push back a little bit on the YouTube. And that might be you. And I am here to say that you are not alone, but someone needs to step up and say this in your school and in your community. And we also need to provide a new definition of what ed tech can and should look like. I have written about this before. You can find this on my website, on my Substack in a more complex downloadable PDF. But I believe that we need to reevaluate four different norms about ed tech. So just like John Haidt did with the four norms of phones and children, we need to reevaluate ed tech. And this is what I think they should be. There should be no internet connected devices, one-to-one devices in K through 12 schools. We shouldn't be doing the same thing for seniors that we're doing for kindergartners. Currently, we are. Number two is children need and adults need tech ed, not ed tech. I wrote about that. I've spoken about that. Number three, we need more paper, we need more handwriting, and we need more relationships. All of these things cost less than the contracts that schools are signing for millions and millions of dollars with these ed tech companies. And finally, I am at the point where I am so disturbed by what I am seeing around AI use, particularly among with chatbots and young children, that it has no place in schools. And I mean that with a hard stop because I would say until it's proven safe, but I think we're a way off from that being the case. So for now, resistance is absolutely necessary. So what do we do about that and how can you do this? First, as parents, we have to know what's in our kids' backpack. What is on our kids' Chromebook? If they're bringing it home, open it, sit with them, have them walk you through it, show what they are using, find out if Typing Club has ads on the side, ask them if they see ads during the day, find out what AI they have because I found through my own daughter's portal that she can still access it, even though I was told that there isn't student facing AI. That's not true. What the district told me is different than the reality. So start asking questions. On that note, get curious. And I always say replace judgment with curiosity. We've got to talk about this in a way that doesn't put people on the defensive, and that is very difficult to do. But this starts by asking non-judgmental questions. Tell me more about this product. Tell me how many minutes a day my kid is on the iPad. Help me understand why my child's seeing ads in Typing Club. Third, we need to follow the funding always. It is so important. The very first thing I do anytime I hear about a new app at this point is I look at their website and I go to their sponsors and partners page. And it is almost always what you expect, which is that there is big tech money behind it. This isn't just the platforms themselves either, though. I would even do this for the bodies that claim to be assessing safety or privacy or, confidentiality. They are compromised too, and we have to start asking questions about this. You may have recently heard that the National PTA, which is funded by Discord and TikTok and Meta, recently stopped their partnership with Meta. But you should know they're still partnering with TikTok. And I just wrote about this in our Reckoning series with my colleague. So please go ahead and check that essay out if you want to look more. We also need to find and form your coalition because this is about finding our other fish in this. We are not swimming alone. And that is hard because it feels like we're alone, but we just have to start by asking questions. And again, the number of people who responded to this webinar tells me there are people out there wanting to know this information. We need to talk about the different options for opting out. And I will briefly just highlight that there are at least three pathways. And I see there's a question in the Q&A about this too. Yes, certainly pulling your kids out of school is an option, but I would like to say that sometimes it might just start by finding out about state testing, because one of the slippery slopes about EdTech is that the devices are given because the testing has gone digital. So if you say, well, we're not going to do the testing, and some states allow this and some states don't, so you need to find out what your state says. That can be one way of saying, well, because my child's not doing the testing, I don't think they really need to practice this on the computer, because that's the justification I hear. Well, the kids are going to be using the computer for testing, therefore they need to get used to it. Quite frankly, I think that is absolutely antithetical to what education should be, but that is what we are hearing. So that's one pathway. The other is to refuse the one-to-one device yourself, just by itself. And I've done this with my own child who's in 8th grade currently and will be going into high school next year without a one-to-one device. This is not ideal or perfect, I should say, because occasionally she has to borrow a loaner laptop from the school. Unfortunately, there's no computer lab, so she can't go there and do that. Even the school library didn't have loaner computers. So again, we're running into problems with this, but it is possible. And I would encourage you, if you are being told no, to ask why and to push back a little bit. And again, I believe in doing this respectfully. And then, of course, the third option is to refuse it altogether. And that may be the hardest hurdle of this. And it has led to parents pulling their kids out of school. But again, that isn't my end goal here, right? And I think that the tipping point is coming. So, and then finally, depending on how angry and upset, you get about it, there are legal remedies or at least legal pathways to addressing this. And my colleagues at the EdTech Law Center, they do not take money. They don't charge you to speak to them. So if you have any questions and you want to learn more about this, you should contact them and just say, I have questions about whether or not this is making sense and if this is okay. Or you might have an example where your child has been harmed. I heard a story the other day of a child who'd been watching pornography in school for 2 weeks and only was noticing, the teacher only noticed because she saw the reflection in the classroom window of his screen, but had no idea that that's what was happening otherwise. And again, I'm not faulting the teacher, but that is happening and we need to be very aware of it. So I am going to finish up and then I'm going to jump into the questions in the chat, which I see questions coming in here. And so I'm actually really happy to announce I have 3 new things that I am offering, and I am trying this. I vastly prefer teaching to running a business, but I am attempting to sort of provide some things that I'm getting asked for and to try to streamline them. So the first is that I am going to host some hands-on small group workshops that will be capped at 12 people. And we will spend an hour working together, looking at your privacy policies, looking at the apps that your children are using. I will help you draft letters that you can send. If you have already sent letters and you're getting pushback, we will troubleshoot. There are lots of different ways that I can support you in this small group setting. I actually have 3 of those. The first one is this Friday, and there are 2 more in the next 2 weeks. So if this is something that's interesting to you, it's first come, first serve. And you just have to sign up. You just pick one of the dates. So yeah, you have to use your phone to sign up on the QR code, or you can go to my website and look under Work with Emily, and these are all listed there as well. Then I'm also have been getting requests for one-on-one, more bespoke services to explore opting out, where parents just want to talk to me privately about their unique situation, but they don't need a full coaching package. I am very happy to speak with you one-to-one in this capacity, and you can follow the link there. And then if you have an active group of parents, and I'm saying a group is a minimum of 5, you can hire me to do some consulting that is bespoke to your community and your school and your efforts. And I will help, whether that is, what kind of public testimony you want to give, writing more letters, more research, more customized support with an entire group. That would be the goal, is to help kind of push that last bit through. And so I just want to say, I'm going to leave this screen up for a moment, and I want to say thank you very much for attending. I always end just like I started with or what I would say at the end of all of my 7th grade classes. It's been an honor and a privilege to be your teacher. I'm navigating all this tech myself here, so I'm going to do my best to pop in and look at these questions. I've booked this for 75 minutes, so if you can stay on and want to ask questions or hear answers, now is your chance. I am hopeful that I do have one other thing that I would love if you are willing to fill out a survey about this, because it is helpful to me to know what parts of this resonated. And if, there are things that I could be doing differently or better, I would appreciate, oh gosh, nope, it's not that link. See, this is a problem with me multitasking in front of multiple screens. Here we go. So I will pop this link in the chat, and if you are willing to fill it out, I would appreciate that. But also, I think you'll get a follow-up email. I don't know if someone has asked this about this being recorded. It is being recorded. I will share it. I posted on my Substack, and I will probably get that out by tomorrow. So let me jump in here to the questions. Let's see. Should I stop sharing? I'll leave it up for another minute. So if we don't accept EdTech, but we can't opt out? Is pulling the kids out of the education system the only option? It really depends on where you are and what kind of response. I would always start with asking questions. And I always say, start with a person with whom you have the best relationship. So if it's a teacher or a counselor, or the principal or another parent, just start by asking questions. One of the sort of tricky parts here, and I didn't go into this tonight, but I've written about it, is all of these companies have unique privacy policy statements, and schools are saying that they can accept these terms on behalf of parents. It's called the school official exemption. Unfortunately, that's actually not the case. And the FTC has recently written a brief about how that was interpreted. And they're saying that actually schools cannot consent on behalf of parents. So this could be one way that you can get into that. And in fact, I can post that essay link if you want to learn more about I think it's on my Substack here about what the briefing, the amicus brief met. So I will pop that link also in the chat if you want to learn more about that. So thank you. Let's see. What is my view of social media and social media ban in schools? Is this presentation going to be shared? Yes, it's going to be shared on my Substack, like I said. I think a ban is important. And I don't know if I'm understanding this correctly, but it's kind of wild to me that schools themselves use social media platforms. I mean, YouTube, first of all, I would argue is a social media platform, but schools themselves have social media pages, or the theater department has an Instagram account. I think that's a very slippery slope. I think it's condoning the use of it, and it is modeling that for children, this is a place to be, and this is, just the norm. I think it's harmful. It's it's an extractive business model that doesn't belong in education. Um, Let's see. I'm going to jump into the chat too. Are there tech ed resources you can recommend for parents if our school district won't do proper tech ed? What can parents do? Yeah, and I should have said this maybe up front here. It is very likely you will be met with some resistance. And so I would just say don't stop at no. Like, no, ask why. Why can't I? What's going on here? I definitely can recommend Kids' Brains and Screens is an excellent resource for families and schools to help children learn about brain development screens. It comes in a book form, and I think there's a home edition and a bigger edition that is available online. Melanie Hempy wrote that. She's a nurse. That is what I would recommend. I love this. It takes only 3.5% of a population to affect social change. We're so close, you guys. This is so exciting. And thank you. Somebody's saying you make me feel normal. Good. The idea is you are normal. And as my friend Andy always says, he's like, we're not crazy. We're not wrong. We're just early. This is all going to come and change. The change is coming. So let's see. Canadian teacher here. Thank you for being a teacher. Oh, diminishing public input, too big. Oh gosh. I actually been in touch with some Canadian activists, so I'm hoping to come up there at some point. Yeah, I thank you for being a teacher pushing back. I do hear from you, and this is so important, and we need teacher voices, and I think teachers need parents to really push back. Correct me if I'm wrong, at least in the US. I really would advise those teachers who can find their allies and parents, because you're right. You're right to be concerned, and it is really detrimental to children. So please do that. Yeah, and thank you. And you can reach out to me, send me an email as well if there's more to that. If we have a child attending kindergarten, yes, this is a great question. I started working on my opt-out process at the spring before the year I wanted to do it. This is a perfect time to start asking these questions. I love that these pre-kindergarten parents are thinking about it. I'm hearing from a lot of pre-kindergarten parents who are asking questions, and that kindergarten teachers are reporting that they are hearing more questions from parents, which is so exciting. This is, I would say, a low-hanging fruit that we could agree that iPads in kindergarten is not a good place. And so I think there's also some nuance to this as well. Again, I really advocate for being respectful in your communication, but I think what we could say is I'm not asking permission to opt out. I'm telling you my child doesn't use an iPad at home, and I don't consent to their using one at school either. So please tell me how I can support you in helping our child navigate the classroom without accessing the iPad. So again, yeah, I don't know if you see the phrasing is slightly different here. Yeah, this is a question about data privacy and misuse of student data that perpetuates discrimination and bias against the most vulnerable students. Yeah, exactly. Like, this is a great, for example, imagine if, well, don't imagine because it's happening. Law enforcement agencies can purchase behavior records from schools and use those to predict future criminal behavior. That's just one example. Deeply concerning. We can see all the ways in which that's problematic. That's one example. Okay, I am looking at a few more of these on here. One of the norms is no internet connected devices one-to-one. Sorry. Yes. So in Australia, this is the question. In Australia, K-12. So in the US, K-12 means all of schooling. I guess what I mean is well, if you really want to know what I think is that they shouldn't even be in higher ed either, but I'm really just focusing right now on education for 5 to 18-year-olds, or actually even 3 and 4-year-olds, because we're hearing about screens in preschools as well. So yes, I apologize. I wasn't more clear about that, but yes, that's what I mean. Are there ways to advocate at the state or national level in addition to advocating within schools and districts? Yes, and I know some of my friends are on this call here from the Distraction Free Policy Project, and I would love to post their website. Let me see if I can. It's distractionfreeschools.com is a great place, as well as, oh, where did my chat box go? Um, Fair Play for Kids, which is an organization that I am a volunteer for. Fairplayforkids.org, I believe, is their website. And I am the co-chair of their Screens in Schools group, where we do a lot of advocacy work as well. And I would highly recommend both of those groups as places to start your advocacy. So thank you. Um, what would you say to a superintendent who's openly looking at reducing ed tech but might be resistant to really jumping in because of the money that's been sunk into everything? I'm going to stop sharing here for a second. So, yeah, that is a very good question and a very common problem. And this is what I was talking about early on with the enmeshment, the fact that so many of these products are embedded. I think what we do is, again, we approach with curiosity and we say, what would it entail? Um, I think when we're talking to school leadership, we can make this more about budget and enrollment, because I think that speaks to superintendents a little bit more. There are huge costs associated with this. And I can give as an example, I was recently giving a talk in the Chicago area, and a superintendent told me, and the IT director were commenting that every year they're noticing that the contracts with these ed tech companies goes up 3 to 5% a year. Well, that's a huge amount of money, and 3 to 5% comes out of something somewhere of a different budget. And so it's really important that we start helping them see that, yeah, you're getting in at the low cost, low free level for a reason, because once you're hooked in, it is hard to get out. It is, to extricate. And so, again, what I would argue for is a pause in the meantime. Just say, could we just not sign any new contracts yet? Could we just stop and assess which ones we currently have? I know of a few districts that are starting to do this due to parent advocacy, but getting their schools to put the list of apps that are used on a website, right? Like that would be a bare minimum, is to help reveal some of that transparency for parents, to help them see this is how many apps are actually being used, and what those privacy policies are. So that's a really great question. I would also see if you can find some finance nerds who want to like actually break out these costs. I know that I get pushback a lot on like, well, paper's really expensive. I'm sorry, our current K-8 science curriculum costs $1 million a year, and that's one curriculum for K-8 only in our district. So $1 million a year is a lot of money times all of the other curricula that they have contracted with. So, I can't imagine that the paper costs. Again, I don't have the numbers, but I know that those are numbers that we could do. And again, even reducing the number of platforms being used would reduce costs. And again, if we want to make it about enrollment, I really think school administrators would benefit from looking at this from what's going to draw more students, because more students and more enrollment is more dollars from the state if you're in the US. So that's another another angle I would use for leadership. Yeah, and again, opting out will cost money too. Or like that's the pushback, right? I am assuming is what you're saying. So a superintendent said opting out would cost too much to implement. Well, according to whom and based on what? I mean, cost too much financially. It doesn't cost the school anything to not give a child a computer. Are they saying it's going to cost more because the paper costs? This is where, parent might have to step in and say, well, I'll print it. And again, this raises issues about privilege and access. But again, that I wouldn't accept that as an answer. I would ask, well, what do you mean by that? And help me understand how. So again, these are slippery and complicated things. And I don't want to demonize school administrators who are trying to do the right thing. I wrote an article about the enmeshment of ed tech. This might be a useful example for you to give your school administrators, or for you to read if you're wanting to know a little bit more about I call it the EdTech flywheel, right? It's like once we've hooked some, we have to give them devices because the testing is online. And then because the testing is online, then they have the devices, and therefore the devices, we might as well have the EdTech curriculum. So it's become this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that, it doesn't need to be that way. And it is going to be painful either way. Whether we continue with the status quo or we extricate now, it is going to be painful. And, I guess it's just what kind of pain do we want to deal with? And I would argue that any kind of pain caused to children is not okay. And that's where I draw the line. So I would just encourage school administrators to, invite them to think about this in a different way. So I got through quite a few questions. Are there any others? I have a couple more minutes. Again, if there are, I'm trying to think if there's other resources I can provide you. I can pop in the links of, again, here are the three different links to the services that I've just added to my website that might be useful. And then again, my website and my First Fish Chronicles on Substack. Please feel free to check those out. Oh, another comment here. I hear school systems outside the US, such as those in Scandinavia, are moving away from screens after seeing them fail. Yeah, in school. Yeah, this is exactly right. We are seeing internationally some changes. There are some schools in Scandinavia rolling back the ed tech. And again, smaller countries, maybe more of a homogenous environment, maybe a little easier to roll it back, but they're doing it. And it's not just limited to to international, Scandinavian countries. I know even in the United States, I'm starting to hear at least exploration of this, and it comes in different ways. Sometimes it's school administrators like, this is just, I see that this isn't working and I'm rolling it back. Sometimes it's about budget, right? It was somewhere in California and I can't remember where, but where the cost to replace the laptops were so expensive that they decided to roll back just because of how much, and by roll back, I mean they made the devices not go home, which is a baby step. And actually, Baltimore Public Schools just announced they are also rolling back ed tech. So it's not only Scandinavia anymore. It's starting to see some of this in the US. So that's exciting. Our state just implemented mandatory online state testing. That is deeply, deeply sad, and it is the norm these days. The district's using this as justification for why one-to-one is necessary for third grade and up. And how would you counter that? Well, it's such a backwards way to do something, like to say that we need to give children internet-connected products for testing them on a computer a handful of times a year, which is probably way too many anyway. Yeah, and it sounds like mandatory online state testing. If you can't opt out, that's fascinating to me. But I would definitely contact EdTech Law Center about what you can or can't do around that. Maybe your child is sick on the day that they have mandatory testing. I don't know. I think to me that ends don't justify the means. Just because a test is online, I mean, is that worth negating all of the other things? Plus, we know that test scores drop when kids spend more time online. So if they ironically want better test scores, they should do less time on the tech. So that's what I would say. Can I help with a small group of parents in Australia? Absolutely. I would love to do that. So you might be a great case for the coalition consulting that I posted on there. So please reach out. Yeah, and in Madrid, Spain, a municipality there stopped one-to-one devices for 500,000 students. This is happening. I mean, the US is in some ways sort of behind, in some ways we're way ahead, and that's not necessarily a good thing. But change is coming, whether we're ready for it or not, whether we want it or not. And I mean, again, I get out of bed in the morning with a lot of hope these days because things feel really different. And so, my goal here again is first and foremost to protect children and childhood, but also teachers and education. And, that is my mission and how I spend most of my waking hours. So please let me know if you have any other questions. I am going to close this out. Again, if you're willing to fill out this very brief survey, and I know it's online and there's irony in that, I do appreciate it. It does help me know how I can improve. So yeah, one more question. Any thoughts on what all the ed tech specialists out there might retrain? Yeah, that's a great question. Look, there is a place for technology. And in fact, I'm not anti-tech. I am tech intentional, and then we need technology education in school. And as an example, I was talking to a friend who works at a district near me, and she was saying, well, we need like back end support. And I'll be the first to say a registrar should not have to use pen and pencil or paper and pencil to make the schedules for 50,000 students. Like that doesn't make any sense. That's what technology is for. That's an absolutely good use of it. But that's a great question. What could an ed tech specialist think about doing to retrain? And I would just say, like, what is your strength? What are your skill sets? And how can those be applied in an environment that doesn't maybe target children? I mean, there are technology products that adults use all the time. Adults can use these. We have fully formed brains. We make choices. We consent or don't consent to privacy policies. So, that's a great question, and I appreciate that you asked that. So, thank you so much. I really appreciate all your kind words in the comments, and don't lose heart. Keep swimming. Change is coming. We are doing this. I am very, very optimistic. So, thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege. Have a wonderful day. Thank you again. Have a good night, everybody.